Our first kind of taste of winter is coming with this first real fall front that's going to dive on down out of Canada and head towards the east coast this week, bringing storms and then cool and dry air behind it. Of course, all of those things need to be monitored closely, so I've got all the details you need to know, so stick around for the whole video. Thank you so much for joining me here at One Nation Weather. We're looking right now at our first piece of energy working its way out of the mountain west and into portions of the plains. I call it the first piece of energy because all it's really going to do is instigate some near-term severe weather, but it's going to weaken as it pushes northward in Canada, but nonetheless a slight risk for severe weather over portions of the high plains and heading into the central plains for your Tuesday, October 3rd, with an elevated hail risk, especially there into portions of Nebraska back down into the Oklahoma Panhandle and western Oklahoma region. So let's time this storm system out for you here before we dive into any deeper details about this storm as it pushes eastward across the country. First of all, you can see by around 3, 4, 5 o'clock Central Time, that's when we first get these storms closer to the storm system itself. So this is going to be in portions of Nebraska and Kansas where we initially get these cells to fire on off. There is a low-end wind and tornado risk with these storms as well for gusts 60 to 70 miles per hour, and then especially at least the chance for a few spin-ups. I think the best chance for spin-ups, though, is going to come with the southern end of this line here into portions of, say, places like Midland, Texas. That's where we're going to have this in your area. This is going to be just east of the New Mexico border, most of these storms, but keep an eye on in far southeastern New Mexico for a few of these storms later in the evening, and then this activity pushes on off towards the east, also bringing with it a low-end flood risk for your Tuesday. Again, basically the cold front and the low pressure system literally drawn out by that flood risk there from the Weather Prediction Center. So let's time out the storm system and what's behind it over the next several days. You can see wraparound moisture. There is some mountain snowfall not represented by this composite reflectivity there, but nonetheless in the highest elevations we are getting snow back there in the Rockies and the Mountain West. This front begins pushing eastward as we head towards your Wednesday, bringing with it the chance for a few isolated severe storms there into Oklahoma and Texas, some flooding in that area especially, as well as a chance for some scattered storms all the way on up into the Midwest. But it's the second front back behind it that's really going to pick this one up and continue progressing eastward with it, bringing that cool air all the way to the east coast. But nonetheless, here we go. This is your October 5th, so as you're waking up on your Thursday morning, very rainy times, maybe some storms knocking on the door, mostly subsevere here in the Great Lakes, places like Chicago. We may see this up through places like Lansing, Michigan, some of these storms pushing on through. This will be pretty squally at times with some heavier rain and maybe some gusty winds, but again, nothing severe. But there's that new low-pressure system picking this up as we go towards your Friday morning. And this is really going to be what's going to carry this front all the way to the East Coast into the weekend, along with the cooler air aspect of this system. Because, again, look at where this first piece of energy went. It's all the way up here into portions of northeastern Canada. And at this point, it doesn't have enough, length in terms of the cold front for us here to really completely drag this off the East Coast. But thankfully, it's got its friend, and it's going to come in, and some of us are going to enjoy the relief. Others of us are not going to like this somewhat taste of fall and winter for us. You can see this is going to bring some pretty rainy weather as well as we head towards the weekend into portions of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, especially if these models are correct. But that's definitely what it's looking like as both pieces of energy combine. And, of course, the further north you are, the closer you are to these low-pressure systems. So it looks like it could be combining with some moisture from the Atlantic to produce some flooding, especially in the Northeast. But where we could also see flooding earlier on is especially into Texas and Oklahoma with some of these rainfall totals in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. Upwards of 3 inches of rain, and some spots could see the totals locally up to 5 to 6 inches out of some of these heavier thunderstorms. So definitely be ready for ponding on the roadways and some heavy flooding for sure. Now, here we go. You can see the dew points. Anywhere you're seeing these blue colors, that's where you're talking about dew points really in the 60s. And you can see how this storm system instigates basically a line all the way on up to International Falls, Minnesota at one point for us here of those dew points. Here we go, dew points in the 70s in Texas as we go towards your Thursday, towards your Friday in the Arklatex region. That's going to be what's really helping these storms continue progressing through and being on the stronger side with the heavy rain and flooding potential. Notice, though, we've got this secondary area of slightly higher dew point that connects with the old one as it moves east, and you can see how that's the one that pushes this towards the east coast. Dew points, say, in the 30s and 40s here in the central parts of the country, whereas the dew points with the front are still in the 50s and 60s. And then, everybody can take a breath of fresh air, especially in these hot and humid places that definitely want the relief, with 30s and 40s for dew points pushing all the way to the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic coastline. Here's your 6 to 10 day temperature probability visibility outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, and you can see looking at pretty solid blue for us here for most of the East Coast, especially there in the southeast and mid-Atlantic. But look at what's behind it, a pattern flip bringing another dome towards the mountain west that could bring some quite intense heat. So I want to play this out in the temperature department day by day. Here we go to our Wednesday afternoon. We've got plenty of 80s heading all the way on up to the Detroit metro area, Lake Erie. Yes, it's going to be pretty warm for you up there in Erie, Pennsylvania with some 70s. We've got 70s in the Carolinas, some 80s as well. This continues building up as we go into our Thursday in some areas, and will actually be warmer along the Gulf Coast Thursday, say, than on Wednesday. But where it's not warmer is up here in the northern plains, where we're barely touching the 50s on Thursday afternoon into portions of North Dakota. But again, we're just to the south and east of that. We're still in the 70s here along the east coast, and then that secondary system, of course, bringing it back into the 80s one last time here into Missouri. But look at this, as we go into your Friday afternoon, you can really begin to see the changes coming with 40s and 50s across the far northern tier of the U.S., with 50s and 60s moving into the Midwest, portions of Wisconsin getting in on the 50s. Here we go Saturday morning. You're going to wake up to some of these temperatures borderline freezing into the Dakotas. This is going to hit northern Nebraska, into portions of Minnesota. So I'd be ready for your first freeze, and a flash one at that, and pretty quick coming. You're not going to have much advance warning. We'll go from these the heat dome conditions that we've been seeing here down into the 40s and the 30s. And then here we go, more 30s and 40s that you're waking up to Sunday morning in that region. And then that also pushes east here into the Great Lakes. But even in the southeast, the mid-south, all the way towards the Gulf Coast, pushing on down into the 40s and closer to Appalachia, 50s here into portions of, some of these areas closer to the Gulf Coast, and some temperatures near 60 right along the coast. We do begin to rebound beyond that, though, towards the plains, but keeping it cool in the east as we head towards, say, October 9th or 10th. Here's your Saturday morning lows. We're looking at temperatures diving on down to around 32, right on that borderline level here. This is in areas of portions of eastern South Dakota. This is going to include eastern North Dakota, portions of Minnesota, portions of Nebraska. I reiterate this because these are the areas where I'm watching you for that freeze, and if you have anything sensitive to that outside, keep that in mind. Areas with our first notable freeze possible, this is really going to include eastern Montana all the way on over towards portions of Minnesota, as well as Wisconsin. Remember, here in the Rockies, we've already had some freezes. That's why I'm not including you in this graphic. This goes all the way on over east of the Great Lakes. And then the heat returns by mid-month. This is the 8 to 14-day temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, and it's looking like another pretty significant departure in terms of it being well above average here is going to be coming to that same area where we just saw 30s. We might be warming back up towards the 70s and 80s by the end of this following week. So that's going to be really insane here with that pattern flip. But one last thing I wanted to talk about is the tropics. We've got Tropical Storm Philippe brushing by Barbuda Island for us here. This is on the Windward Islands, and we're looking at a tropical storm warning from this system. It is anticipated to become a stronger tropical storm. I'm not necessarily seeing this becoming a hurricane, but whatever it does, it's dragging a lot of tropical moisture with it, and some of that could interact with the cold front along the east coast to enhance the rainfall even more along the mid-Atlantic and east coast. Just look at that squally mess over the Atlantic pushing on off towards the north. So I would monitor this very closely, especially if I live anywhere impacted by Hurricane Lee. Especially, I'm not talking about a hurricane hitting you, but I'm talking about indirect influence from this system, and that would be something that I'd be monitoring down the line as those two low pressure systems get near each other and could interact and produce some very heavy rainfall. But for now, here are the credits on your screen. Thank you so much for watching. Consider leaving a like and subscribing, but I'm out for now.